All right. Nice. Things are working out. It's a good morning. So last Sunday evening, we were actually taken to the words that were previous to what Jesse had just read, which can be found from Exodus chapter 20. And Brother Ryan actually did a really, really good job of presenting us the words that are and leading us into the words that are found in Exodus chapter 20:19. And those words were, just to kind of be a reminder to everyone, and these are the people of Israel speaking to Moses, "You speak to us, and we will listen. But do not let God speak to us, lest we die." For the members here who were able to hear that sermon, it was really, really amazing, and I'm going to attempt to do it a little bit of justice and kind of build on those concepts this morning. If any of our members or visitors were unable to attend, the really, really cool thing is we actually put all of our sermons online on our YouTube channel, so you can actually go there and actually view that lesson there. So hopefully my lesson will make a little bit more sense in context of that in the event that you weren't able to be here. So as we consider the people and we consider the awesomeness, let's go back and let's paint the scene a little bit. And I'm not going to do probably as good a job as Ryan. I can't go up and down here 15 times like he did. That was pretty amazing. And I'm not going to be able to do as much animation as he was. But really, when we think through this, when we think through the awesomeness of the scene, let's take our minds back there a little bit. So you have this cloud. You basically have, and you're tasting it, you're smelling it. The presence of God is dwelling with Israel. He's come down. He's actually made himself in their midst. They can see him. And there's a fear over these people. They're seeing God now, and they realize how real this just got. And so they say to Moses, "You speak to us, and we will listen. But do not let God speak to us, lest we die." Now, what's really important to me is then what happens next, because what we're going to see and what I'm going to take us through this morning is actually what happened next in this story. This fear and this reverence that the people had, we're going to find out this morning that was very, very short-lived. That while they saw God amongst them, they still didn't necessarily maintain the very things that he told them not to do. And so that's where we're going to spend some time this morning, because I think that's really, really relevant for us. I think especially even as we consider where we start a lot of our days and we're focused and we're going to do well and we're going to do for God, there can be a lot of distractions. And so we're going to spend some time just talking about some of the distractions that the people of Israel faced during this time. So to break into where Brother Jesse had actually left us, and Moses' response to the people, Moses said to the people, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that his fear may be before you, so that you may not sin." So the people stood afar off, but Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. So we have, again, this fear and this reverence still in these people. They're so fearful and reverent of God. They see his presence. It's so awesome. They're not even going close to it. They're saying, "You know what? All right, Moses, that's you. That's you. Talk to him on our behalf." And Moses goes up to talk to God. And what's amazing is the Lord's first words to Moses. Again, Moses has come down. He's now gone and talked to the people. He's prepared the people to see God. And now the people have seen God, and Moses goes back up to talk to God. And what's extremely amazing to me is just the foreshadowing of the events that are about to transpire and how God already knows what's going to happen. And we see that evidence in the very next verse, verse 22. "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, you have seen that I have talked to you from heaven. You shall make anything to be with me. You shall not make anything to be with me, gods of silver or gods of gold. You shall not make for yourselves.'" God then proceeds him to tell him about how he's to build an altar. And then also gives him another series of rules concerning servants, concerning property, concerning animal laws, violence. He's able to give him those rules. So Moses comes down. And just like the people said, they listen. You speak to God on our behalf, and you come back and you relay that to us, and we'll listen. So we break into 24. And as God's putting really a close to these rules that he's given to Moses, one of the things he does is he says, okay, I've given you these rules. I'm ready to make this serious. I'm ready to ratify this covenant. We're going to go ahead and we're going to get serious about this. So what I need you to do is I need you to go down, and I need you to go get your brother Aaron. I need you to go get Nadab. I need you to go get Abihu. And I need you to go get 70 of the elders of Israel. And Moses, while you're going to draw near me, they're going to stand afar off and they're going to pray, because we're going to go ahead and we're going to make this official. We're going to actually seal this covenant. So Moses does exactly what God asked him to do. He goes down to the people. And in verse 3 of chapter 24, we actually see this. Again, verse 3 of chapter 24. So Moses came and told the people all the words of the Lord and all the judgments. And all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has spoken, all the words which the Lord has said, we will do. Now, I want us to keep in mind, because they said that to him earlier. They're now repeating that again. All the words which the Lord has said, we will do. And let's keep in mind the very last words that we read of the Lord and how he greeted Moses in chapter 20, verse 23. You shall not make anything to be with me, gods of silver or gods of gold. You shall not make for yourselves. So Moses comes down, and the people appear to be still in that same state of fear and reverence. They seem to still be very, very zealous at this point. All that the Lord has spoken that we will do. And Moses writes down all the words of the Lord. And all the people answered. And again, he then begins to actually build the altar. He takes the blood, he sprinkles it on the altar, and he takes the book of the covenant and reads it to the people. And again in verse 7, we see the same message from the people. All that the Lord has spoken, we will do. So now, having built the altar, having spoken to the people, Moses is ready to get Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 elders of Israel, and actually to proceed and go back up to the mountain to talk to God. And he starts to do that. And we actually see that in verse 12. Then the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and be there, and I will give you tablets of stone, and the law and commandments which I have written, that you may teach them. So Moses arose with his assistant Joshua, and Moses went up to the mountain of God. And he said to the elders, wait here for us until we come back. Indeed, Aaron and Hur are with you. If a man has a difficulty, let him go to them. So we see, again, Moses proceeding back up to the mountain, only this time he now has Aaron, he now has Nadab, he now has Abihu, he now has the 70 elders. And as Moses gets ready to proceed to actually go to be and dwell in God's midst and go closer than any of the others are able to, we see him basically telling the people of Israel, Aaron's in charge. So if you have anything, if any dissensions, if anything comes up, go to Aaron. That's going to be a little bit of a problem, as we're going to see. Breaking back into context in verse 15. Then Moses went up into the mountain. A cloud covered the mountain. Now the glory of the Lord rested on Mount Sinai, and the Lord covered it 6 days. And on the 7th day he called Moses out of the midst of the cloud. The sight of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. Now I want to stop for a minute because I want you guys to kind of see something. Again, we have this fear and this reverence, but let's pay really, really close attention to the words that are spoken to us in verse 17. The sight of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. And here's where I want us to pay special attention to. In the eyes of the children of Israel. Again, God was still close enough to these people that they could see him. They could physically see God's presence on the mountain. And that's especially important based on where we're going to go next with the story and what we're going to actually see in terms of some of their sins. So Moses went into the midst of the cloud and went up to the mountain. And Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And we'll see that while Moses was actually up on the mountain dwelling with God, that his election for Aaron and putting Aaron in charge may not have been the best idea. So God continues to give Moses a series of instructions on how he's to build the tabernacle, how he's to declare the royal priesthood. And what we're going to do, though, is we're going to actually jump a little bit ahead, and we're going to look at Exodus chapter 32, because this really starts to then get into the meat of what happened next. So again, the people of God can see God dwelling amongst them, and his presence is burning on top of Mount Sinai so much that it's right there. You can't miss it. It's like, picture the biggest thunderstorm you've ever seen, multiply that by 10, and there's God. Right there. You can see him. And Moses actually walks up into that. So Moses is there with him. But then something happens. Now all of a sudden, the people don't have Moses. And we really get to see what that does to the people in terms of their focus. When Moses is there, you hear, these are the same people that say to Moses, you speak to us, we're going to listen. But don't let God speak to us because we'll die. And Moses, again, coming back to that verse 20, you even hear Moses telling them that fear is healthy. He says, do not fear, for the Lord has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin. So again, Moses is telling them, the fear you have is very healthy because this fear is going to keep you doing God's will and not your own. This fear is important. But this fear shifts a little bit. And this is really where I'm going with this. In chapter 32, instead of fearing God, now the people fear for themselves because they no longer have Moses. Moses is up. He's in 40 days, 40 nights. They don't know if he's coming back. They don't know what's happened to Moses. Someone's got to lead them. They're in the wilderness. How are they going to get out of this? This is the same Moses that has now led them out of Egypt. This is the same Moses who's called on to lead them to the promised land. And now he's not here. So what are we going to do? So we'll start in verse 32. Now when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together to Aaron and said to him, come, make us gods that shall go before us. For as is Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. Again, we now see these people without a leadership presence, without that fear of God, and now they're afraid for their survival, the right here and now. That focus has shifted. And what's important to note that, and I had to do a little bit of digging to do this, is when you actually see in verse 1 where they say, come make us gods, the Hebrew word of that is actually Elohim. And as we heard from Ryan last week, when we're talking about God, the God of the covenant, we're actually talking about Yahweh. So what's important is they still haven't esteemed these gods here to take the place of Yahweh, the God of the covenant. What they're basically saying here is, we need something to lead us. So if you really think about it, there's a lot of irony in this because they're going to Aaron, who's been put second in charge, and saying, we need someone to lead us. In other words, you haven't been tested. We don't know you, Aaron. We know Moses. He led us out of Egypt. But I don't know who you are. So we need gods to go before us that they can help to lead us out of the wilderness. And unfortunately, rather than taking a stand and being able to use that as an opportunity to be a strong leader and to prevent them from sin, we see Aaron, well, he gives in. And Aaron said to them, break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people broke off their golden earrings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool and made a molded calf. Then they said, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now let's stop right there for a minute. The people in verse 1 said, we want you to make us Elohim. We want you to make us leaders, similar to the ones we'd seen in Egypt, similar to the Egyptians prayed to. And now we have a declaration being made by Aaron. This is a God, O Israel. This is your God, Yahweh, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. Again, let's go back to 20. Let's go back to one of the first things God tells him. We can also see it in 24. You shall put no other gods before me. You shall not make gods out of silver. You shall not make gods out of gold. For I am your God. I am the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt. It wasn't Moses, it's me, God. So when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation. Tomorrow is the feast of the Lord. And you can just imagine all this happening, right? So Aaron's down here. He's talking to the people. They've rebelled. They're fashioning this golden calf. And then at the same time, you have Moses receiving instruction about the tabernacle. And the irony in that, like, the way God works is so amazing, because if you really think about this, God is telling Moses how he is going to be dwelling with the people. And at that very same time that Moses is up there receiving that instruction, that same 40-day and 40-night period, these same people have basically forgot about God because Moses isn't around and now built a golden calf. Does that happen to any of us? Sometimes, over the course of a week, over the course of a day, we fix our minds on God right there in the morning. We make a declaration, God, this day is going to be for you. I am going to live for you. And then something happens. Then we lose our focus, whether it be a deadline at work, whether it be a circumstance beyond our control, whether it be anything that happens. And all of a sudden, just like the people of Israel, we take our mind off of God. We stop fearing him, we stop worried about that for a minute, and we start worrying about self. We're going to see what the dangers that come along with that. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that the same thing that's going to happen to the children of Israel, God's chosen people, would be the same calamity that would fall upon us if we do that same thing and take our eyes off of God. So, again, let's kind of break back into context. Moses is up there. He's talking with God. The people have created a golden calf. And what's important next is God's reaction. And we'll actually get that in verse 7. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go, get down, for your people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them." I just want to stop right there. And let's go back just a little bit. I realize we're stopping a little bit. But I want you to remember, these are the same people that said in verse 24, not too long ago, before Moses went up into the clouds, "All the words which the Lord has said, we will do." Moses up in the cloud. "They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded calf and worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, 'This is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'I have seen this people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, that I may consume them, and I will make you a great nation.'" Gave them a very simple instruction. They didn't do it. God's mad, and rightfully so. Again, they can see God's presence. Moses hasn't been gone that long. We really think about things. 40 days. Feels like a long time, but they've been wandering for a while as well. And we're going to see that as a result of this, they're going to continue to wander, because they've lost track and really lost focus on where their focus should be, which is on God. However, even despite all this, and the amazing thing to me is Moses talks with God. He knows the presence of God. He knows how great God is. So we actually have then Moses enter an intercession on the people of Israel. And Moses pleads with God, and he says this. He says, "Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people?" Again, giving God the glory and also acknowledging who these people are to God. And I think that's especially important, because he's saying, these are your people, Lord. "Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians speak and say, 'He who brought them out to harm them, to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath and relent for this harm to your people. Remember Isaac.'" So again, now he starts to really get God to remember those who were actually faithful. So in spite of these faithless people who've now created this golden image in a matter of 40 days, now he starts to actually have God reflect to those who were faithful. He says, "Remember Isaac, remember Abraham, remember Isaac, remember Israel, your servants to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, 'I will multiply your descendants and the stars of heaven. And all the land that I have spoken of, I give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. So the Lord relented from harm he said he would do to his people. So now we have Moses making this intercession. He's able to basically say, God, let me go talk to them. They're so far gone. And in the next couple verses, I kind of picture Moses, and it says, and Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and there were 2 tablets. So I almost picture Moses turning, and he's got these tablets under his arms. And he's walking down, and he gets to Joshua. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people, he said to Moses, there's a noise of war in the camp. And Moses said, it's not a noise of the shout of victory, nor a noise of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear. So this is what's crazy to me is 40 days, 40 nights, you've forgotten about God, you've fashioned a golden calf, you've given the golden calf a theme song. Really? Really? Don't place any other gods before me. No, we've done that, and now it's got a theme song. And you can just see Moses, like, carrying these tablets, right, coming down from talking to God, from this awesome presence, right? And he sees this going on, and he's like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me right now? So Moses' anger became hot, and he cast the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. So I almost picture Moses, like, kind of throwing these tablets down, not because he doesn't understand how important they are, not because he doesn't understand that these are written from God, but because he sees such severity and such extreme measures need to be that he has to almost get to these people that much faster. He has to stop God's wrath from consuming these people because what they have done is so heinous in the sight of God. And then we see Moses arrives at the camp, and he takes the calf which they had made, and he burns it in the fire and grinds it into a powder, and he scatters it amongst water and has them drink it. So now we have the golden calf destroyed. Now it's time to go talk to Aaron. Now it's time to go see what was my brother thinking. What was he doing? I put you in charge. What's going on? So Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought such a great sin upon them? So we already see Moses basically going to him and saying, I put you in charge. I was gone 40 days. What gives? 40 days, really? Come on. So Aaron says, and here's where you kind of start to see Aaron not really owning what he's done. And this is another challenge for us as Christians is when we do sin, sometimes we actually need to be convicted in that sin and admit that sin so that way we can rid that sin of our lives. And what we see from Aaron here is that he's not willing to really do that because we're going to see excuse after excuse after excuse out of Aaron, right? And I challenge us as Christians that we don't make those same excuses for God or to God as we sin. So Aaron says, do not let the anger of my Lord become hot. You know the people, that they are set on evil. In other words, it was them, it wasn't me. They made me do it. For they said to me, make us gods that shall go before this. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So again, we were worried. We didn't know where we were going next. We didn't have our fearless leader. We didn't have the Moses that brought us out of the land of Egypt. Never mind the fact that we saw God. His presence was still dwelling with us. Rather than going to him, rather than praying to him, rather than asking him to deliver Moses back to us, we've now fashioned a calf. It's just that takes my breath away because, again, you have the awesomeness of God on display. You can see it, and yet you're putting your faith in something that you've seen in Egyptian captivity or something similar, an idol god. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And here we have actually then breaking back into context in verse 32, chapter 32, verse 24. We actually have then Aaron's response. And I said to them, whoever has any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me, and I cast it into the fire, that this calf came out. Really? I was talking to Deb about this last night. It's kind of funny because it's almost like you see Aaron, and he's like, they gave me all this gold, and I threw it into a fire, and magic. You almost seem like taking a step back and saying that. This calf just came out. And we see that how contradictory that is, because even earlier in this, we see that Aaron said to them, break off the golden earrings which are in your ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. So the people broke off the golden earrings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from it, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool and made a molded calf. So again, this whole concept of magic, or this calf just came out. Come on. Really? And I can almost see like Moses like, really? Now when Moses saw the people were unrestrained, for Aaron had not restrained them to the shame among their enemies, then Moses stood at the entrance of the camp and made this proclamation, whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him. And he said to him, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let every man put a sword on his side and go in and out from the entrance to entrance throughout the camp, and let every man kill his brother, every man his companion, and every man kill his neighbor. So now we see the severity and the real consequence of what's happened. Because these people have turned away from God, the greatest punishment of all is going to be brought to them, death. And it's not just going to be the death of a couple people. We're going to see here that it's actually quite a few people who died here. Because as the sons of Levi and Moses worked their way through camp, we'll see in verse 28, so the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. So now they've gone through, 3,000 people have fallen. And Moses then says to the people, consecrate yourself to the Lord today. Again, rededicate yourselves. This is unacceptable. I shouldn't have to be doing this. We shouldn't be killing people. But at the end of the day, I have to do this because of how great your sin is. I have to cut this out. So again, thinking back to Aaron, and thinking back to Aaron allowing the people to make these golden calves. If we really were to look at this, Aaron had the opportunity and ability at that point in time to stop the sin, or to not basically perpetuate this sin. And what's, again, funny to me is God knows this is coming, because, again, in chapter 20, where we started out this morning, one of the first things God says to Moses, chapter 20, again, we're just going to come back there, because he knows this is going to happen. That's what's so ironic about this. He says, you shall not make anything to be with me, gods of silver or gods of gold. You shall not make for yourselves. So again, now Moses has basically asked them to consecrate themselves. They've cleaned out the unbelievers. And then Moses says, now I'm going to have to go up and to intercede to God on your behalf once again. And that's exactly what he does. Then Moses returns to the Lord and says, oh, these people have committed a great sin and have made to themselves a god of gold. Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, I pray, blot me out of your book, which you have written. And the Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book. Now therefore go, lead the people to the place which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit for punishment, I will visit punishment upon their sin. So the Lord plagued the people. Now for me, here's where it got kind of cool, because the story of the golden calf, and really looking at this, we can look at it in the Old Testament and in the context of the Old Testament, but really as we start to put this in together with the context of the New Testament, that's when it really starts to come to life to me. And to do that, we're actually going to look at Hebrews chapter 3. And in Hebrews chapter 3, I'll be reading verses 7 through 19. Therefore, as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as in the rebellion in the days of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tested me, tried me, and saw my works 40 years. Therefore I was angry with that generation, and I said, They always go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swore my wrath that they shall not enter my rest. And what's important, if we remember, is even after the plagues, God continues then with that generation, the generation of unbelief, the generation who put this golden calf before God, despite him leading them out of Israel. We'll see God actually lead that generation for 40 years through the wilderness up to the promised land, but not allow them to go in. That's pretty scary for all of us, too, when we think about that. If we're putting things before God, how are we ever going to see that same promised land? And even if we know about that promised land, how are we going to enter into it if we're putting things before God in our very lives? Dropping back into the verse. Beware, brethren, lest there be any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. Here's some things, though, and what I like about this, I want to stop here and take a minute, because these are things that even as Christians today we can do to prevent us from losing sight of God. Verse 13, but exhort one another daily, which is called today, lest any one of you be hardened through deceitfulness. This really shows how as a family here, we're able to work together. We're able to strengthen those weak hands. We're able to strengthen that body. We're able to actually work towards that common cause, which is the calling of Christ. For if we have become partakers of Christ, we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast to the end. While it is said, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as in the rebellion. For who, having heard, rebelled? Indeed, was not all who came out of Egypt led by Moses? Now, with whom he was angry for 40 years, was it not those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who did not obey? So we see that they could not enter because of unbelief. We see the consequence of the people of Israel due to their unbelief. What's amazing about this is, despite their unbelief, despite everything that they did, that God still saw in his own grace a way to save us all, and that's through his very son, who he was willing to give on our behalf. Despite their rebellion, by the faith of Abraham that we're told, by the faith of Isaac, by the faith of these old men, and their ability to do God's will, to seek God first, we actually do have a way to enter into this rest. We actually do have a way to enter into this promised land. So for all of us this morning, I just have a couple questions. In closing us out is, are we walking in rebellion due to unbelief? Are there things in our lives that are keeping us from being able to focus entirely on God? Do we see him there, but he's off in the distance, so it's not really real and we're not actually drawing near to him? So the first question I asked was, are you walking in rebellion due to unbelief? But likewise, I'd ask, are you walking in rebellion despite your belief? Are there things in your lives that you need to clean up? And despite the fact that you're a Christian, you haven't done that yet. At this time, we extend the invitation to those who may not yet have put on the name of Christ through baptism. Without the confession of baptism, unfortunately, you may feel a lot like you're walking in the wilderness, very similar to the Israelites did. But again, I'd ask that you acknowledge what Jesus had done for us and the fact that he is able, likewise, to do the same for you, to get you to that promised land, to get you to that home in heaven. Perhaps even as a child of God, you've struggled with sin and need the prayers of the family here. If we can be of service in either of these requests, would you please come forward? Together we stand and say.